Today, we finish our positional tier series for all veterans players currently in the NFL. We talk quarterbacks, we talk price points compared to rookie picks, including rookie picks from this year's draft class in the tiers themselves. Stick around for all that and more. And welcome into the Dino Construction Podcast. Today, it's just Justin and David, no JP. He's had a busy week, some moving and other stuff going on. Did not have the Wi-Fi up and running yet. And as much as we like the idea of him dialing in with smoke signals, we decided just to hold the fort down with just the two of us. David, anything going on? Your Dynasty leagues? Any trades you're making these days? Anything? How are you staying busy in the off season so far? The non-point scoring season, sorry.
Most of it's been doing research for the show. I've not made too many trades. Got a couple irons in the fire, but nothing's come yet.
Maybe even a bigger question. By the time we release this, the Super Bowl will be out, but who you got this weekend?
I mean, just pick the Chiefs until they lose, right?
Yeah.
I was talking about this with my buddy the other day. I wish I had just bet moneyline Chiefs for every playoff game for the last 3 years.
My students ask, what's going to happen? I'm like, unfortunately, probably the Chiefs are going to win, guys, and I hate it. But hey, what can you do? I did see a sleeper post that Kelsey said he's not going to retire, loves the game, so fingers crossed.
Yeah, we'll see.
And we're about to hop right into our tiers. Before we do, if you don't mind hitting that like and subscribe button, it means the world to us. Plus, we're coming out with a lot of rookie content in the coming weeks. Excited to pump that out. So like, subscribe, love it. Thank you so much, guys. And David, will you go ahead and before we even start with the tiers, do you consider much of a big difference between 6-point and 4-point passing touchdown when you're doing your tiers?
Personally, don't. I probably should take it more into consideration because it does make a slight difference. But honestly, I don't care that much, especially in superflex. A lot of the values and name value as well as longevity. Elite guys are elite either way. But just since you bring it up, the points that we're going to be talking about, the point per game totals are 6-point passing touchdown. The ranking we're going to give is in point per game, and you have to have played in at least 8 games last season to qualify. And just to throw this out there, we put zero effort into which order players come in the tier. So it's just a tier. Just because it comes out in an order doesn't mean that's how we have it. We wanted to focus mostly on getting the tiers right rather than the ranking. Just wanted to start with all that.
Make sure to let us know if we're stupid for the arbitrary order that David put the players that we view as very comparable and similar in a row. Make sure to roast us in the comments below. We appreciate it, y'all.
It was basically just how they came up in conversation. So I guess maybe there's some subconscious ranking, but like I said, there's no active discussion on it. So anyways, first tier. Pretty obvious, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Jaden Daniels. No picks yet because, well, it'll take a lot. So I suppose that's a pretty good place to start. Justin, 5 firsts roughly, we thinking, or?
Jeez Louise. In a start 9, I think that 5 firsts of price point, if like one of them is the 101 this year, I'm counting that as at least 2 firsts, and then trying to offer like a couple more firsts and a second or something like that. So if I have like the 101, I do like 3 firsts, a second, 2/3, and Matthew Stafford. I don't know, some trash can offer. 5 firsts of value sounds absolutely bonkers. I don't think I'll ever pay that for it. I think I will wait until like last year I was able to trade Mahomes a first and like a second essentially for Allen. And like
how many firsts is Mahomes? He's carrying 3+. If it's a little over 3, that hits about 5, right?
Yeah, it's close.
I think that's really like when we say 5 firsts, it's not practical that someone's just like, here's 5 first-round picks. More likely you're coming up from a guy like Mahomes or Caleb or potentially Drake May if someone's a huge Drake May fan, So, but yeah, there's probably a piece that's covering, 2 to 4 of those firsts in these situations.
Yeah, it is crazy, but that is the value of these guys in your lineups, right? I have a little bit of a dog water roster in one league where Adam Thielen was doing a lot of work for me down the stretch. My running back room was Najee Harris, Brian Robinson, and DeAndre Swift, which is great if you want 10 to 12 points per game. And I have Lamar Jackson and Jaden Daniels as my quarterbacks, and I won a championship. Very, very mediocre across the rest of the board. Couple hammers, but these guys can carry you. It is insane. And there really isn't such thing as too much to pay for them. There is just such thing as sacrificing too much of the rest of your flexibility to get. So if you have done the 2-year rebuild, the 3-year rebuild, something where you've just accrued a treasure trove of assets and you literally have 7 or 8 first round picks this year and 4 or 5 next year, and you can fill out your starting lineup and spend 4 to 5 firsts on one of these guys. Like it's not crazy, even though it makes my heart hurt thinking about spending that much on any one roster spot.
Yeah, and the other side of that is, especially if you're trying to just offer five first, how many people have, Allen or Jackson and are looking to get out for just draft pick value? I think Allen and Lamar are tied for my most rostered player, maybe with Garrett Wilson, because I'm a big Garrett Wilson fan, as we know, but also a huge elite QB fan, and that's why I have those two. I don't have any Jaden Daniels. I can only think of one team where I would sell Allen for just picks. It'd be great too, because I would love to start a rebuild on that team. I just don't have the assets. Definitely need both sides to be interested there. I expect most of the time, if you're trading for one of these guys, you're tearing up from a different quarterback, though.
And David, you're at the 101 in a startup. Which of these guys are you taking in a superflex startup?
I'm probably sticking with Allen, but I don't know. I'd flip a coin maybe. I don't know, scoring settings probably doesn't matter to me. I'm probably going Allen though.
Yeah, I think I might be going Daniels, but I probably would go. I'd be very tempted to try to trade down a spot or two if anybody has a difference. So let's talk about in a startup. It's hard to trade down to the 103 and only pick up a second. But would you be willing to switch between these guys for a second round pick up that asset if we really think they're all in the same tier?
You mean a second round rookie pick or a second round startup pick? 'Cause we're
Second
talking
round rookie pick.
Okay, I was gonna say I'd definitely do it for a second round startup pick. I would try to move further. It'd be, starting off your super flex draft. Hopefully somebody really wants one of these guys. And if it was like a Kentucky Derby style to select your order, then you've probably picked 101 or, in some way. Or I guess it depends. Probably not though. Honestly, second's not much. I'd rather have. Like Josh Allen has been QB 1 or 2 in total points for the last 5 years. He's still almost 29, not even 29 yet. So the guy's scored 435 points, 25 points per game in each of the last 5 seasons. That's minimum. That's just such a big difference. And I know Lamar had an amazing season this year. It's actually better than any of Allen's last 5, but his consistency just hasn't quite been there. And we love Jaden Daniels, and I don't think he's gonna take a massive step backwards or anything. But if you have the 101, you take Daniels, and his sophomore slump comes in, then you just missed on 2 of the most consistent and high-powered assets in Superflex. So, gosh, yeah, I don't know. I might drop to 102 for a second, just because I don't have much conviction between Allen and Jackson, but I would prefer them to Jaden Daniels if I'm starting a startup.
And just testing that a little bit further, because you have no exposure to Jaden Daniels, are you willing to take Daniels in a second for one of these guys to diversify your portfolio a little bit? Not in a startup, but in some of those existing leagues. Are you considering that?
I would do that in a league or two, yeah. The one that I would take just picks for Allen, I would do that for probably.
All right, I hear you, and I think I'm pretty comparable on that with you as well. In a startup, I agree that it's not unreasonable, and if we have these guys in the same tier, taking that second, it's not a bad process deal. But if I'm really looking to get off of it, I'm probably looking to get down, pick up the 112 and the 201 for the 101 and throw them a bone later on. Really sell down further than tear down, because usually I try to do that. But anyways, we'll have a lot more startup strategy stuff going forward. So tier 1, studs, nothing to it. Jalen Hurts, Patrick Mahomes, and Joseph Burrow. Kind of fun seeing Joe Burrow at the award show just in that suit, no shirt on. I like his vibes.
Mr. Joe Cool.
So Hurts here obviously has the most rushing upside out of this group, not particularly close. So when you look at this group here, and we were talking about this, JP and I did discuss whether or not he should be kind of in his own tier as a 2A to the 2Bs, as a 1B, but I don't think he really qualifies as 1B probably. I'd clearly take the guys above him, at least probably be willing to take a 1-2 swap to move to the other guys up there. Whether or not I should, I think I would if I could afford it. So clearly doesn't belong with the top guys. David, give the case kind of on why you have him with these guys here.
Yeah, and I think consistency and longevity for Burrow and Mahomes. A lot of people were worried about the addition of Saquon, what it would do to Hurts. He still had 630 rushing yards and 14 rushing touchdowns. I think they can coexist together. Seems pretty obvious. Kind of hurt maybe AJ Brown, Devonta Smith a little bit. Those two are going to be just fine. And he's still not 27, so we expect at least a few more elite years from Hurts. So I understand the case. But Burrow is pretty much top 5 every year too. This year was the highest he's ever scored in a single season, so maybe he's not going to quite hit this season again, but he's still very consistent. We expect him to be consistent for several years. We know the value's there. I think in the streets, if you're trying to trade for one of these two guys, the value's pretty much identical. Same with Mahomes, even. I know he got a little, I mean, kind of been slumping the last 2 years, I guess, but he still has 5+ years of elite play in him. And he's Patrick Mahomes. We have zero concerns about his job security. His weapons should all be healthy next year. I don't know if I'm competing and it's free, give me Hurts, sure. But if I have any of these three guys, I'm not sure I'd pay to move to any of the other two. So I think that's kind of why we landed on having all three in the tier.
Yeah, I think if I am competing, I probably would be willing to add a little bit to get to hurt, maybe a second. If I feel like knowing it for sure that I have hammer production at QB is the difference between a championship for me and not. I did that last offseason when we had Burrow and Lamar in the same tier. I think I gave you a second and 2/4 or something like that to move from Burrow to Lamar. Obviously, now we have them in different tiers than we had them in the same tier. I do think like going to the rushing production guy, it's not a bad move to make if you feel like you can afford it and you feel like this is your championship window is this year, because they also will probably hold they will definitely hold value as well past this season. So it's like paying for production, but it could backfire, that type of advice, because there is, of course, a non ridiculous chance that Hurts finishes last out of these guys next year in fantasy and is still a top 7 or 8 quarterback, right? These guys are all phenomenal. So cash price on these guys, David, 4-ish firsts of value. Is that something you're potentially comfortable with?
I mean, that's probably the going rate. Maybe if one or two of them are decent, you can get away with three. Again, it's probably more likely that you're tiering up from a different quarterback or tiering down potentially from one of the tier one guys. I don't know if it was on recording or not, but we mentioned maybe doing a 1-2 swap to move from tier one down to tier two. I think I'd be okay with that in most situations. That implies, if we're talking 5 first for tier one, that implies about 4 for tier two. So I think that's fair. I do think, especially with this tier and their ages, I have to be competing to try to get into this tier. If I'm rebuilding and I'm at Jaden Daniels, I want to stay there. If I'm with Lamar or Allen, I don't really care to move to Burrow, Mahomes, or Hurts unless I'm getting a really good deal to do so. But if I am competing and I can move up from, Drake May, Caleb Williams, or something for a cheap price, I think that's a really good way to go about it.
I think I am pretty similar on opinions there. These are definitely guys I'm interested in having as my QB1. Think they have the ability to be difference makers. Mahomes, obviously, we were falling a little bit lower on him as a dynasty community until he had a strong end of the season. I mean, he's just capable of having that type of production, that type of strong end of the season every year. We've seen it multiple seasons. We've seen a QB1 overall finish from him in the last 5 years, and no reason to expect him to stop being good at football all of the sudden. I'm going to posit the same question just to test like the validity of this as a tier. Start 11, where the individual position doesn't matter as much and depth is more important. Are you willing to take a second to switch between these guys just in a vacuum? You had a pretty even portfolio of all three of them across your leagues.
Yeah, maybe at this point, I was definitely on the fence in the top tier. I think this tier is a little closer. I do think situationally I could talk myself out of it, but I think most of the time I would take a second. Unless I knew it was going to be late, then I might not.
Yeah, when I'm looking at it, I think it's just a question of what I expect my window to be. If I'm loaded up with veterans and I feel like I'm going to compete this year, maybe next year, and then probably go into a rebuild, I might be more inclined to keep Hurts because I think like I said, I view him a little bit more of a win now asset out of the group with, some staying power for sure at 27. And if I feel like my win window really starts in 2 years, but I'm kind of full competing the next year, maybe two, where I'm just young and kind of mid, but coming into its own, then I'm much more likely to keep Burrow and Mahomes, if that makes sense.
I think that's definitely fair. And I think that's kind of the situation where I'd want to stay too, is on Hurts on a competitor with a closing window. I'm going to go ahead and read the next one. Got anything left on tier two? All righty. Tier three, we got Justin Herbert, Drake May, Caleb Williams, and CJ Stroud. And now we are including some rookie picks. We got the 101 plus here. I don't think the 101 quite gets it done for these guys, maybe in some leagues, but we pretty much agree that you're probably going to have to add to it to get to one of these four. We just dive right into the polarizing player here, at least as far as the three of us were concerned.
Yeah, for me, where CJ Stroud finished this year. So obviously his rookie year, he was, and this might be total points, not points per game, but was ending up as QB 11 as a rookie. And this year, QB 28, 15.3 points per game, QB 19 in total points on Sleeper, if I'm not wrong, because he was healthy, but 15.3 points per game, QB 28, but QB 9 in points per game. Yes, the offensive line was bad. Yes, the weapons were injured. I'm just not convinced that he has like real elite upside. I'm not convinced that he's going to be much better than a Jared Goff type of fantasy player. I think, God, if I could trade him for him as a Lions fan, I'd do it. In NFL context, I think he's got the ability to grow, but he's not that rushing guy. Typically, I'm not that interested within this tier compared to the upside that I think the other guys here have. And as far as the 101 plus, I only have one share of Stroud, and if I could, I mean, sure, it's team dependent also, that I feel like I could weather losing him from a QB room standpoint. But if I could turn Stroud into the 101, I probably would consider doing it to try to get Genty.
I don't think the plus is huge in this situation. That's why we've got it in the tiers. So I could see situationally doing that. Like you said it though, Stroud's line was terrible. Not only that, his weapons all got hurt, all three of them at some point, and I think even stacked together, all three were out for a time together. I could be off on that, but third highest percent of dropbacks that led to sacks. They had the least second half points in the NFL. So there was like no adjustments. Coach couldn't find a way to protect Stroud, get it out of his hands quick, even when the weapons were getting worse. So they fired Slowick. He was a name that we all thought was an up and coming young coach. I still think he's pretty smart. I still think he's going to have a shot somewhere else. So they replaced him with Nick Caley, Rams passing game coordinator. Obviously, McVay calls the plays over there, but there's been a pretty big successful tree growing under McVay for quite a while now. Caley can be another branch on that tree. Add an offensive lineman or two, get healthy with Nico, and maybe Pinktel's not going to be back this year, but maybe they add a guy in the first. Seen tons of mocks with them taking either Egbuka or Burden. That'd be awesome for them. I know there's a lot of ifs and things, but the guy's still 23. He's going to be 23 most of next year. He's going into his third year. I still think he's got a lot of room to grow as an NFL quarterback, which helps us in fantasy. I get that maybe he's the shakiest part of this tier. I think he definitely belongs here. And for me, if I'm going to move him for the 101, it'd have to be a perfect situation. And I don't imagine that happening.
Looking at Herbert and his 19.5 points per game, May 15.9 points per game on the season, but 19.4 in games he played 32% of the snaps. And Caleb Williams, 19.4 points per game from week 11 on, although it was 17.3 on the season. So I just expect those other guys to be able to produce, close to that 20 points per game. And I think that's pretty safe like floor in my opinion for what I can expect from those players a lot in fantasy. And I feel like that's kind of close to Stroud's ceiling, to be honest, is the way that I feel about him as a player. Maybe I've just got him pigeonholed into this, but I kind of view his ceiling close to the other guys' fantasy floors. And I think you disagree with that.
I definitely disagree with that. He had an elite rookie year. I know there was some ups and downs to it, maybe more than our memories like to admit, but it was still a great rookie season. Nico is one of the better receivers in the NFL at this point. I think we can all agree on that. We've got another Shanahan McVay offensive mind taking over. I think there are definitely some holes, a lot more question marks than the other guys. But I mean, look, Drake May doesn't have anything either. I know he's a little bit younger and he's got a little bit more rushing upside, but Stroud's rookie year was better than May's. I mean, not that May had a bad one, but with how young he is, it's not at all unreasonable to expect progression from him.
All right, so moving on to these other players here: Justin Herbert, Drake May, Caleb Williams. So we have two rookies and we have one guy who is already starting his second contract in Herbert. Herbert, we did see run occasionally in that Chargers offense, but I think we would both agree that we expect out of these guys the highest rushing upsides to kind of come from May. Probably would put first, Caleb Williams kind of second in rushing upside. How high is the ceiling for these two rookies, David? Is tier one attainable?
I mean, I think it is for both of them. Yeah, Caleb had the hype for sure. He's getting Ben Johnson. He's got good offensive weapons around him. If he just has a great season, it probably takes in this scoring format probably 20, at least 20 points per game, probably closer to 23 or so. And I think he's a lock for tier one. Drake May, kind of the same thing. His situation's quite a bit worse, and he didn't quite have the hype that Caleb had, but he still had a ton of hype. So I think tier one is possible for both. I wouldn't bet on it at this point, but yeah, absolutely it's possible.
And cash price on players in this range, I feel like we're settling in at that 3 firsts type of valuation of price point. Is that kind of where you are feeling the value out as well?
Yeah, I mean 3-ish. I don't know if I would pay a good first if it was 3. Maybe like a 104 and a random 26 if I think my team's good or something. Might have to add a little to that, but 3 is definitely pushing it. But I think somewhere in the like 2.5 to 3.25.
Yeah, I kind of view this if you watched our wide receiver tier episode last week when we were talking about like BTJ, Nico Collins, Amon-Ra St. Brown. They're probably worth about 3 firsts, but we're trying to get whichever one we can get for 2.5, right? 2 firsts and a second, right? I don't include Stroud in there personally, but if I could choose, if I asked the Herbert, the May, and the Caleb Williams manager to take the 106, a 25, 26 first, and a 26 second, and one of them will take it and the other two won't, I'm taking the one that will take it versus trying to have to pay first. I do view those guys as relatively interchangeable. I probably prefer the rookies if I am in a rebuild to Herbert, but I don't think Herbert in a rebuild is bad either. In fact, he might be safer in that rebuild because less likely to potentially bust. So maybe I'm even almost reconsidering that statement as I talk. But a lot of comparability between these guys. For me, I'm not taking a second to go between Stroud and the other guys, like I've kind of established. I think I would be willing to pay 2 seconds, depending on where they are, to move from Stroud to the rest of these guys, just to get off of him. Because yeah. But David, a single second in this tier, is that moving the needle for you enough to make a pivot?
Again, if I am competing, I want to see a little bit more from the offseason for May and Stroud to come off of Herbert. But I've seen enough from what the Bears are doing. I would move between Herbert and Caleb for a second if I'm competing. With May not having any weapons or an offensive line and Stroud only having Nico, basically, I'm going to need to see a little bit more there. But I did want to go back to something you touched on, cross-positional value here. Let's say you've got one of the 6 quarterbacks we talked about in tiers 1 or 2. You've got one of these guys, and then you've got a Darnold or something, and maybe you've got some picks. You don't really feel like you need a quarterback. Maybe you have an excess. Are you trading cross positionally into our tier 2 of receivers? So, Amon-Ra, Nico, BTJ, Puka.
Yeah, I am absolutely considering that. In fact, in the last 5 days, I have done that. So I had a QB room with Herbert, Caleb Williams, and Michael Penix Jr., who we have a tier or two below this. And I tried shopping all three of them. And Penix, the best offer I had was the 106, which is not a bad offer for Penix. But my problem, my concern there was not a lot of teams in that league need quarterback. So I thought I might end up getting the best player on the board at that point being a quarterback, potentially. Not a position I wanted to be in because I'm not sure Penix is going to be better than the guys that are drafted this year, but I think he's a little bit safer of an asset in some ways than whoever I might have to draft there at that 106. So I ended up taking, putting all of them on the block, talking with some other guys. And the deal that I ended up getting done, originally I probably could have practically straight up gotten Herbert done for BTJ, but he wanted some wide receiver back. So I ended up moving Herbert, Ayuk in the 206 for BTJ in the 106. So I kind of viewed that as two separate deals, but Herbert for BTJ is pretty much straight value and something I would have done straight up. So if I have a good QB room, I am absolutely willing to move cross positional from here to a BTJ, a Puka, a Nico, or a Amon-Ra St. Brown, because spoiler, in Superflex, you can only start 2 quarterbacks. And if I can get a hammer at wide receiver and still feel good enough about my quarterback room, I'm very happy to do that. So
what about Gibbs or Bijan? Same thing?
Yeah, it's a thing I'm willing to consider. I'm less comfortable with it because
Yeah, it feels weird, doesn't it?
3 of them are Bs, but it's not a bad process.
Yeah.
I'm willing to do it.
Yeah, I think I'm on the same page as you. I'd much rather go cross positional to a wide receiver, even maybe like Trey McBride or probably. I mean, if there's no premium, maybe Brock Bowers. If there's a premium, I don't quite think these guys will get you Brock Bowers. If I have a spare quarterback, that's a great way to go get a hammer to add to your lineup because, like Justin said, you can only start 2 of them. Love to have a third one there just in case. Certainly, if you've got 4, and I do think I agree with your process there. Shop them all, see what the best deal you can get is. Don't get set on which one you want to sell. Sell the one that gets you the deal done, that helps your team the most.
Yeah, I was talking with a friend of the show, Awesome Dumpling, about that when he was looking to, in his Empire League, he was asking you for advice about too. He's like, which quarterback do I try to sell? Yes.
I think I had the same conversation with him.
Yeah, he said he asked you
It's
to.
funny that our brains link up like that all the time.
Yeah, he was like, you said exactly what David said. I'm like, honestly, one of us could have just recorded this podcast alone, with the exception of Stroud, practically.
Probably need JP around.
And one guy in this next tier we're also going to disagree about as well. Tier 4 we have as Kyler Murray, Jordan Love, Bo Nix, and Brockathan Purdy. It might just be Brock.
Pretty sure it's broccoli. No, and we also put the pick 102 in here. I do think that's a little league dependent. I wouldn't be surprised if you have to add to the 102 in most leagues, but you might be able to get that done straight across. Let's go ahead and start with the polarizing guy here too. That was Brock Purdy. I was the advocate for putting him in this tier, kind of like Stroud in the last year, I suppose. Justin, you're just a hater.
You know me. I like to hate.
He's had back-to-back seasons over 20 points per game. He's got Kyle Shanahan still calling his plays, designing his plays. He's got maybe the best skill position players in the league. If Higgins stays in Cincinnati, maybe they have a pretty good case. But he's due for an extension, which we expect him to get. He's 25. He was QB 11 with 20 and a half points per game in the scoring setting last year. I don't see a world where I wouldn't pay the tier price to move between Purdy and these three guys, especially when you look at the next tier. He clearly fits better with these guys, in my opinion.
I think he's probably a little bit above the next tier. I don't know that I view that extension as certain of a thing. There's a lot of industry people. There's always been a lot of hate for Purdy, but this guy made a living throwing untimely third, fourth quarter interceptions down the stretch of this season. We saw it in back-to-back games at one point and then against the Lions in one of those where he threw, this could have, had the chance to win the game through an interception. And I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't get the extension this offseason. I wouldn't be surprised if he does either, but I think it's up in the air. I don't think it's a guarantee, and is not a guarantee versus the job security that Love, Murray, and Knicks currently have. If it's only a second, I think I'm probably leaning the other three over Purdy in a second.
I would happily take a second to move between these guys. I've been getting more and more comfortable as the tiers go down with that second round pick price, if you haven't noticed.
As a tradition.
Everyone in this tier is maybe not young. Purdy and Nick's about 25, Love 26, Kyler 27, but young enough in quarterback age that I'm not too concerned about that in my process here. A difference of 2 years, basically 2.5 years spans this whole tier. So that's not really a major impact for me. I think they're all, in that 18 to 22 points per game range. Next year's is probably their likely outcome. Keep trade cut even. This is quarterbacks 11, 12, 13, and 15. So they're valued pretty close together. I don't have much conviction going any one way. I have a little thing about owning Packers players, having them on my rosters because I already root too much. I'm too invested in the Packers, so I don't want to own a ton of Love. That's just more of a silly thing about me than it is good fantasy football process.
And David, kind of looking at this tier, these players here. So we have Kyler, we have Love, we have Knicks, we have Purdy. In tiers 1 through 3, we have a total of 10 quarterback. This tier puts us to 14 quarterback. Looking at a startup, are you considering these guys at the back end of the second round, 210, 211, 212? I know we haven't looked at a lot of mock draft boards, but do you think that that's kind of the point in a startup that you feel like is reasonable value for these guys? Or are you more looking in the third round potentially?
Some really quick math, so I'm probably missing someone. I think right at the back end of the second round is where they start coming into play. I would guess it's more into the third when you see them go. But every draft's different too. If your first 6 picks for these quarterbacks, none of the receivers have gone, and then somebody trades up to take, Drake May over Malik Neighbors, all of a sudden the precedent's set that all these quarterbacks are going high. Maybe you have to go up to get one of these guys in the second. I would guess at most one goes like 211, 212, and then the other 3 go in the third or maybe fourth, probably third though.
Yeah, it just depends because you can also see those crazy QB runs. Like last offseason, we saw some round 3 Jared Goff happening, stuff like that, which isn't egregious, but
feels bad. I had to pull the trigger on him in the fourth in a startup last year, and it felt wrong. Still kind of does, even though it really wasn't wrong.
And I do feel like this is the area where QBs get potentially a little bit more flat is after this tier. Are you willing to pay 2 random 26 firsts that you don't expect to be early?
Yeah, I think so. Especially if I'm actually paying the cash price now, because it's a lot more reasonable to have 2 random 26 firsts than it is to have 5. So if I'm actually just paying cash price, that probably means that I need a quarterback. And if I can get one for 2 firsts without having to give up, if I have a lower tiered quarterback on my roster, if I'm able to keep them, that really helps. So yeah, I think that's a fair price, and I think that's probably going to get it done at least most of the time.
And looking at this year's picks, I know we have the 102 here. If you need quarterback, it's the only thing you need. You're set at running back. And you can't get anything above this tier with the 101? Are you willing to look at the 101 for one of these guys in this year's class if quarterbacks you only need? Can't do anything else with it?
I'd probably want something else on top just to make me feel better. But, if we have 101 plus last year, 102 in this tier, but as I said at the top, you might have to add to 102. So I think 101 might be a fair price. I feel like you can get more with that flexibility between now and the draft, though. So I don't know. I might pull the trigger just because quarterbacks are scarce, and if you can get one for a price you like, you might as well do it now before you lose the opportunity. That's the tight one, though.
Yeah, I think it is as well. I could definitely see taking it either way, team need dependent. In a vacuum, I think I prefer the 101 and what we expect Genty to be as a potential hammer. That guy is good at football from what we have seen. Moving on, can you read tier 5 for us here, David?
Yeah, Trevor Lawrence, Baker Mayfield, Jared Goff, Dak Prescott, JJ McCarthy, Michael Penix. We went with the pick range 105 to 108. Kind of a big tier here. Couple of young guys, couple of old guys, and one guy kind of in between. I guess let's start with the young guys who didn't play much. One thing I've been really curious about, people seem to be very high on Michael Penix for one good game against a really bad defense. Talking about him in the draft process last year, most people weren't that high on him. We went top 10, which definitely has to change our outlook, but it's not like we thought he was a surefire top 10 draft pick going in. And now people are talking about him like he would be the clear 101 in this class and things. And I'm just not sure why. Like, I get we're happy if we drafted him because he's starting at least a year sooner than we expected, but we haven't seen anything. He's still the same prospect he was. He's just another year older. This just kind of feels uncomfortable at this price for me personally, but I know it's what it'll take to get him. Do you kind of want to explain that to me? Are you high on him, or higher than me at least?
My process I'm kind of like evaluating and going by here is with quarterbacks, talent is everything and can get you there, right? Like Jaden Daniels' situation, it's not bad. It's not amazing, right? Terry McLaurin's a good wide receiver. Zach Ertz is not a bad tight end, not a great tight end. He's a very average tight end. Eckler is a very good pass catching option, not a fantastic running play at this point of his age. And then the rest of his wide receivers are kind of questionable. Talent can elevate you if you're that guy. But then if you're just good, and I think, we all think Bryce Young was good. Whether or not we think he's great, different question, but we thought he was good, right? People had him up there, right, as a top quarterback going into last year's draft class. The situation was bad. Will Levis, we didn't believe in him. We saw a lot of tools, but the situation was not great, right? The weapons around him aren't that great. Also, he's just bad. If I'm betting on a young guy, I want to bet on a guy who's in what we feel like is a good situation, right? We like the offensive minds there. We like the offensive weapons there. Maybe like a John Smith back and actually have a tight end. Just kidding. Obviously, Kyle Pitts is questionable, but Drake London is good. We think that Bijan Robinson is obviously phenomenal. And Darnell Mooney, solid wide receiver 3, not a bad wide receiver 2. If they take somebody else there to give him a third weapon at wide receiver, we like the tools around him. We think that the offensive system can be okay for him as well. So for me, it's a bet on the opportunity in the system as well as the fact that the film guys that watched him play in the NFL this year, whether or not he was performing, with massive counting numbers, they thought that he looked like he was an NFL caliber quarterback. So an NFL caliber quarterback with good weapons, I think can produce is kind of the bet that I'm making in here. So if I'm betting on a quarterback that is in this kind of range, I want to bet on situation as much as talent.
An NFL caliber quarterback with good weapons isn't something I'm trying to pay a premium pick for. I would like the bar to be a little bit higher there personally. I think JJ McCarthy sitting right next to him in our graphic here makes the conversation makes a lot of sense. We don't know that he's starting. If we did, I don't think there'd be any question who I'd prefer between the two. But he's good situation and he's younger, so his issues are a little easier to clean up, we would assume. That would be the hardest for me to tier from Penix to McCarthy. But everybody else, like if I'm competing and I want one of these older guys, I don't know what price you're gonna ask me for, but I'm probably gonna take the extra pick. But between Penix and McCarthy, it'd be hard for me to go from McCarthy to Penix without getting something of value. I don't think I'd do it for like just a third. I don't even know if I'd do it for 2/3, but I'd probably do 2/3 for everybody else.
So obviously JJ McCarthy, for me, he fits that same bill. He's a young guy. We like the situation. That allows them the ability to have a good season. And when a guy this age has a good season, they go up in value like crazy. So if either JJ or Penix has a good season, tier 3 is very, very attainable or higher.
Penix is much closer in age to Trevor Lawrence than JJ McCarthy.
No, he is older. He was an older prospect, but there are, we didn't like him, but there were a lot of people who liked him in the NFL circles before the draft as well. People who didn't as well. I think a big part of it was the multiple ACL injuries. That was a big concern for people, right? Like that was one of the biggest knocks in him pre-draft. It was a big shock to see him drafted where he went. They drafted him over JJ McCarthy. They like him. So I think we have to admit that there's definitely a chance that we're wrong here. And our, pre-draft notions were wrong. And definitely I think it's right to include them in the same place because yes, obviously we prefer the younger guy in a vacuum, but Penix has a lot more experience. And that's not a bad thing when you look at like a Bo Nix and what he was able to do with all of that more experience, over the course of the season. And it usually takes guys a little while to get going, right? Penix looked like a competent NFL player in a short handful of games. Usually it takes a rookie quarterback a little while to get to that confident NFL quarterback type of like playing. And starting out there, I just feel like the ability to ascend from there to better is definitely present. So I think it's a upside bet, right? It's risky, but it's an upside bet.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm just not sure he's proven much of anything.
I mean, just having watched him play in a handful of these games compared to having watched Cousins play.
He started 3 games. He's thrown an interception in all 3 of them. He had 0 passing touchdowns 1 game, 1 in the second, 2 the third. Had 223 yards, 202 yards, 312. The good game was against a poor Carolina defense.
Yeah, one of those interceptions I know for a fact was that like off of Pitts' hand right into another one. It wasn't Penix's fault.
I mean, look, obviously, you don't judge quarterbacks just on raw stats, anyways. So I get that. I'm just saying it's been 3 starts, so like I don't think anybody's pre-draft evaluation has enough information to have changed. Personally,
All right. Well, I kind of disagree a little bit.
I think he still belongs in the tier, though. I mean,
NFL's a fast-paced sport, and being able to just pick it up and look competent, there's a lot of players that cannot do that, especially behind a offensive line that, Kirk Cousins was under a lot of duress there, So it's not like it was the perfect situation for him to step into late in the season on a team with playoff hopes. Like, it's a lot of pressure, and he did not fold. So I think that in and of itself worth something. But I think we could kind of agree to disagree a little bit on it at this point and move on to these older guys. So looking at Trevor Lawrence, Baker Mayfield, Jared Goff, and Dakathan Prescott. So Baker Mayfield, QB3 in points per game, 26.3. Goff, QB7, 23.4. Lawrence, QB22, 16.7. And Dak, QB20 at 17.3. I think we see 2 of these guys losing their offensive coordinators. We do know Lawrence is going to be switching coaching staffs around a bit, right?
yeah, two losing their OCs, 2 losing their head coaches.
Offensive coordinator who was just helping Baker be the QB3, right? Well, head coach who will be calling the plays in Cohen, right? So it's an interesting thing. If we're going off of last season's stats and assuming things won't be different, there's no reason that Lawrence and Dak should be in the same tier as Baker and Goff. But we play Dynasty and we don't assume things will be exactly the same. I do think I'm higher on Baker than either of you guys are. I think he's kind of turning a quarter personally. We can say a lot of it was the offensive coordinator that now has left, and that could be a big issue. His offensive coordinator left the year before. Obviously, it was a good offensive coordinator in Cohen that came in, but I think he's just got that dog in him. We saw Mike Evans go out a little bit this year, and he was still doing really well from fantasy, having to just dink and dunk to Kate Otten, McMillan, and, throwing 10 to 15 passes a game, it seemed like, to White and Irving, right? Like, he's just seems to be like finding ways to get it done. And I think he's just a better athlete than any of the other old farts in this tier at this point in their careers. So I think I'm kind of, if I had to pay a second from the other guys to move to him, I'd want to wait until I know what's going on with their wide receiver room. But if he has the same weapons, if Godwin stays, that would be amazing. If he had Godwin and Evans going into next year, I think I'm easily willing to pay a second to go between the other guys and him. And right now I'm still kind of considering it based on that QB3 finish, and 27.3 points per game that's difference making.
Are you counting Lawrence as an old fart? Because he's 25. He just barely turned 25. These other guys are all like 30.
29 for some of them, but
20, like, going to be 30 before the season starts for Baker. Come on.
I'm just not that interested in Lawrence. I have a couple shares. I'll keep it because I can't get that much for him.
I don't know. I mean, I think Liam Cohen's a big deal. Their staff for the last few years has not been great. We've all wanted to see change there. At BTJ going into year 2, you're going to assume Christian Kirk, Evan Ingram back healthy. I kind of think you could turn it around. I'm not saying like, oh, it's going to be the big Trevor Lawrence breakout or something. We've been talking about that for 6 years now, it feels. But I do think he's a little different than Goff, Dak, and Baker here. Between Goff, Dak, and Baker, I do prefer Baker. But if you're throwing Lawrence in here, I'll take the extra years that I have, and I'd prefer Lawrence to those 3.
I would take 3 years of Baker probably over 6 years of Lawrence almost. And I think we'll have more than 3 years of Baker. Like, say Baker plays till he's 35 at some level of play that's commensurate with where he's at now, which is not unreasonable for quarterback versus Lawrence playing the way he's been playing. Maybe he takes steps forward, but if he plays about how he has been playing for his career so far for another 10 years, I'd take 6 years of Baker over 10 years of Lawrence because I think it's more likely to win me championships. And I can always replace QB 18 in 6 years pretty easily on my roster. So
I guess I would push back and say I don't really think it's reasonable to expect any amount of years left for Baker at that level.
I don't expect 27 points per game, but I think I do believe like he's a guy that I think is going to be north of 20. I think is with the way he's playing, I think he's balling out. He's got decent weapons around him still. He's going to at least have one of the two wide receivers that we want him to have, and then most of the other same weapons. And he balled out without having both of those wide receivers for most of the season, anyways. Like I think he's just got north of 20 as a pretty reasonable outcome. I don't think 27 is that expectable, and we'd be ecstatic if Lawrence approached 20 points per game.
I mean, he was at 16.7 last year and he had a lot working against him. I don't think 20's, again, this is a little inflated scoring with 6-point touchdown passes, but I don't think 20's out of the question for Lawrence. And I think 5 extra years is a lot. I think Liam Cohen's a big deal too. Like he's very well respected for a reason. We don't know. They are promoting their passing game coordinator, the Buccaneers, to their new OC, so there should be some continuity there, which we like. But this guy's never called plays before. Definitely something that can be an issue. It can also, bring new life to a situation, and maybe Baker's right back here in the top 5 quarterback situation. That's just a lot of questions for me. Also, like, he is older than we expect. He's going to be 30 next year. We'll be losing some steam on Baker this time next year. So I'd rather sell him at this price and get out than I would buy.
That's fair. I hear where you're coming from. Just think I have a differing opinion here. We're much more contrarian than we were in some of the other positional things, David. It's kind of fun.
I don't know, I think what wasn't it running backs where I was throwing a little fit.
Oh yeah, that's true. But JP and I were right then, so we just kind of ignored you.
Here there was like massive differences. It's like, are we even like playing the same game?
And obviously, Goff performed very well this year, losing Ben Johnson, but still has all of the same weapons. So I think we expect slight drop off, but nothing crazy. And Dak, same offensive coordinator, different head coach. In fact, offensive coordinator is now the head coach. So
exactly,
we expect a lot of continuity there, and we expect QB 10 to 13 probably in scoring as like the expected outcome. Could go higher, could go a little lower.
Just one thing to add on Goff there. I've seen, I know that their hire technically comes from outside of the building. He was Denver's passing game coordinator last year. John Morton is his name. He was on the staff in New Orleans with Campbell. He was also on Detroit's staff in 2022. Not sure who's going to be calling plays between him and Campbell, but priority for them was to keep basically the same offense they had built around Goff. So I don't expect much change. The bells and whistles probably a little different, but the core offense should be basically the same.
As a Lions fan, I wouldn't see a little bit less trick plays and a little bit more bread and butter when you have that running game and that offensive line. I mean, so I ain't upset.
I think that's kind of what we should expect too from a fantasy perspective. Who knows if the play calling will be as efficient? I expect the aggression to still be there with Campbell still as the head coach. It's something to pay attention to, but I wouldn't be too worried about your Lions players if you're worried about Ben Johnson leaving.
All right, and moving on to tier 6, we have Tua, Bryce Young, A-Rich, and Sam Darnold. Kind of a tier I don't feel super comfortable with.
Yeah, I agree. And we put in the 111, 112. Initially, we had the 110 in there too, but even that felt a little uncomfortable. Even the 111, 112 for these guys feels a little uncomfortable. So I made the executive decision to shrink that pick range a smidge when I made the graphic.
You have my approval to always make that executive decision with this gross of quarterbacks. A lot of upside here. Bryce Young, he had a strong finish to the season. There are a lot of people in NFL circles who say like they think he could they think the whole Panthers could take a step forward next year. People have like made parallels, like I listened to like Rich Eisen a bit. He's made a lot of parallels to like them and the Lions coming off of like just missing the playoffs. The Lions just missed the playoffs. Panthers didn't just miss the playoffs, but that strong finish to the season, right? To, carry over into momentum in the next year. He did look good. Tua, of course, he is a good quarterback when healthy. Big question. Anthony Richardson, we had him, tier 3, tier 2-ish range, last offseason just because that rushing upside. And Sam Darnold, if he stays in Minnesota, probably moves up to tier 4 if he gets a contract there somehow, So a lot of upside, a lot of ceiling, a lot of floor could drop off with that ceiling as well. How are you approaching this if you have these players on your roster and they are your QB2 right now, David?
If they're my QB2, I would love to tier up into 5 if I can for cheap for one of those veterans we were talking about. If I'm rebuilding, I'm happy to carry Bryce or A Rich and just hope for the best. I mean, you're not going to get elite quarterbacks easily. They're either really expensive or you have to draft them and hope they develop. These guys both have had some road bumps, but they both had strong finishes, both 21 points per game after they came back from their benching. Bryce was a bigger sample size, 10 games compared to A Rich's 5, but both are pretty darn good after that. So I think if they can both prove that they have that job on lock, at least indefinitely, I think they would both probably rise a tier just for that alone. So I don't know. I like the upside of the young guys. It scares the crap out of me. I don't like to say someone's injury prone, but he's only played more than 13 games once in his 5-year career so far. He's one bad hit away. We assume, and we say this a lot, then he takes a bad hit, then he comes back again. But we've all seen it, so we know what's up with Tua. But when he's out there, he is good. He is really good. So it's hard to sell him for a cheap price when you have him on a team, but I'm definitely not buying Tua and Darnold. I just don't know where he's going to play right now. So I'm probably holding Darnold because I expect him to go somewhere that won't hurt his value. I think just him having that security will at least maintain his value. If I can get out of Tua for this price, I happily will. The other guys, I'm not sure about.
I could see buying Tua for this price if you need a quarterback with where the draft class is. Say you just won a championship, but you won a championship. Say you were somehow starting Aaron Rodgers or something. You expect him to be gone. You're stacked at every other position. Like it's not a bad bet for a back end QB1, low end QB2, but I don't think I'd do it. Like I understand the process.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's just so
I'm
hard.
just out on this tier in general as a QB2. I love and I have a few shares of Bryce Young as my QB3. I have a few Sam Darnolds as my QB3. Love that. A-okay, 100%. But if these guys are my QB2, I'm looking to move them. And if they're my QB3, I'm potentially also interested in moving them at around this price. It is a lot of value to be holding at QB3, but there is some ability for that to go up as well.
Yeah, just real quick while we're here, no JP, but I think we'll touch on it anyways. He offered, at least verbally offered, said if I gave him the 201, he'd give me Bryce. That's a roster where I have a ton of picks and almost nothing on my team. So I decided to wait and hold out for hopefully my picks to gain a little value. Kind of on the fence about it, but he would have ended up as my QB2, and I think it would have taken away some of my draft flexibility. I don't know. I'm kind of on the fence about it, especially at the 201. I think that's a really fair price, but we did not pull the trigger. So I don't know, just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
That's retirement home, right? I think I'd be willing to pull the trigger there, especially because you have to make those draft picks before the NFL draft. So because of that, I think JP is a fool for offering that. That's why I traded all my draft picks in that league, is because they're devalued. So your 201, not only does it have to be more valuable than Bryce Young, you have to be right before you have all the information with it.
See, so my thought there, and I agree, like on an independent value per pick, that it's harder to hit, but you have a chance of missing and overdrafting on your first round pick. So you have a chance of hitting and underdrafting players in the second round. Like what if Jackson Dart falls to the 201 and he ends up going top 10? Then all of a sudden that was a massive hit. You know what I mean? So my thought is with how many picks I have, I'm just going to spray and pray and hope that where I lose the value, I make it up later.
Gotta love the old
I
spray
mean,
and pray.
I think it's a fair approach in that one, and it might bite me, but I feel like my chances at having first round misses are either a little less or equal to my chances of second round hits. So I don't know, and trading a pick out of that gives me one less dart at that board. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I understand your process. Can't disagree with you there. All right, so let's just do one last thing here. Are you willing to add a second and a third to get off of these guys into the tier above?
I think, except for going from one of the young guys to one of the other young guys, because I'm not. I mean, I'd prefer Penix and McCarthy to Bryce and A-Rich, but I think I'd rather have the extra assets if I'm doing that. I'm competing and I'm trying to get from one of the young from Bryce or A-Rich to Goff or Dak or Baker. I would do that, and if I'm competing, I would do that for Tua or Darnold as well.
Yeah, I think I agree mostly with you there. Don't hate the idea of getting more market security with JJ or Penix if you have all that flexibility, but that's a lot to pay for safety. So I kind of agree there too. I think maybe a single second I'd consider, or a 2-3 swap is more what I'm interested in to get up to that tier, which a second between tiers at this point is a bit to pay. So moving on to our last tier, tier 7. It's a small one. Geno Smith. Matthew Stafford, Justin Fields, and a mid second. We acknowledge that the second range that we're paying for this tier could be anywhere from like the 203, 204 if we're getting a Geno Smith to a 211, 212 if we're going for Stafford, honestly. We could see paying a higher one for Stafford potentially, or Fields. Fields has a lot of upside. Fields could easily be in tier 5 in a few months if he has a starting job somewhere, or even yeah, I don't see much higher than tier 5, but just because of the fantasy production that he can put down on the field. So it's an interesting tier, and these are the last guys that we really consider to have a job next year. We didn't include anyone in our tier series here that does not have a guaranteed job next year. All those guys are maybe worth a third, probably what we'd say about them. I guess Derek Carr probably has a job, but ugh.
Probably, but I mean, are we sure about that even? I think that's kind of it. I want to say I just counted 28 players in our tiers here, 27. So, I mean, you count that and then Shador and Cam Ward, that's 29. Room for 3 more starters. When we figure out who those 3 are, go ahead and throw them in tier 7. You know, the one that would kind of stand out to me if we water down the tier a little bit is Geno. I think he has a solid case for being in tier 6 personally. I think the fact that he's almost 35 is probably why we don't have him there. But you look at his 18.1 points per game compared to Stafford's 15.9. Fields doesn't even have a starting job right now, technically. So I don't know. I clearly prefer Geno in this tier. And I think especially if we add in guys like Derek Carr, then Geno starts to stand out as maybe not belonging even. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, we really just didn't want to have a one man Geno Smith tier because we're not paying a first for him, but we're also willing to pay much more than a mid to late second for him. Well, not much more, but an earlier second for him, right? 202, 3, 4, depending on the team need for quarterback and stuff. I mean, JSN's a good wide receiver. DK Metcalf, Lockett, if he's still there, if they don't figure out a way to get rid of him, like they have a heck of a wide receiver room. Yeah, he's bad at football. He's bad at NFL football. I don't think he's ever going to win them anything, but he's there next year. He's going to score fantasy points. So, and I don't feel like Stafford has the same throughout the season ceiling. Although any week he can throw for 4 touchdowns, he just also has a lot of down games where they rush for a lot of touchdowns and other stuff. So, yeah, Geno definitely is a little bit above the other guys. I'd be willing to take Geno over Stafford in a third, over Fields in a third, which for tier 7 in any position, like knowing that, like that, you're right. It's not really the same tier. It's kind of 7A and 7B basically. But yeah, still Geno is hard to move. I have one roster where I have him. He's my QB3. I cannot move him for the life of me, David.
Well, I think you're probably asking too much then, apparently.
I was asking for, I think, a second and a third last year for him.
Yeah, he is hard to move. I think the only share I had I actually traded to you after Dak got hurt because you were chasing a championship, and I think you got it, right? So
Oh yeah, I do have another Geno. I traded him for Burrow though, right before the playoffs, and Burrow got me the bye and also helped me win that championship. So
I'm sure you
Geno,
added a little bit to Geno to get to Burrow.
I, it's a best ball league, one QB, but I think I added like a first and a second or something like that to him, which I was ecstatic to do because best
How's
ball.
your QB room? You need one? I need to trade one.
In best ball, we can talk later. I can always use one more quarterback, David. You know me, but that's an interesting league for me. I got to figure out when to stop selling all of my future firsts.
Yeah, I've got to figure out when to start buying and trying to compete. I'm right on the edge there. I think I might end up doing it for this off season.
Hey, it's always more fun to compete than it is to rebuild in season. Darn it, right now. Isn't it fun having all those picks, David?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, that team, I don't actually have a ton of picks. I've drafted well, so I've just got a really nice core of receivers. I hit on Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas Jr. last year, got Olave Jason and Garrett Wilson, Trey McBride. I put like literally no running backs.
Yeah, I've looked at your wide receiver room. I mean, it's not as good as mine at the top, but I think it's a little bit deeper. Anyway, so quarterbacks, I feel like this kind of wraps up the conversation for the guys who are in the league. Let's just real quick at the end. Where do you put quarterback 1, whoever that ends up being in? Is that tier 5 for you, David?
I think they'll end up going 103 probably in most drafts. So between 4 and 5, I think probably 5 is fair, but I think I probably prefer them to most tier 5 unless I'm competing.
Fair enough. And we're going to start diving into those quarterback and all of those rookies more, starting with our episodes next week, where we're going to be diving into rookies leading up to the combine. So thank you for joining us for another episode of the Down Construction Podcast. Hope you found this as helpful for you as it was for us. Please remember to like and subscribe wherever you listen or view. And from all of us here at the Down Construction Podcast, until next time.